Jihan had won, and there was only one person he wanted to celebrate with. Then the phone call came.
There's been an accident.
The phone froze to his ear for what felt like a minute. He moved quickly to his car. He opened his door, and he entered and drove off. All the while he was thinking, I hope nothing happened to Anna. Okay, my favorite listeners, I have been reading your comments and I really apologize for the cliffhangers, and also for always keeping you waiting. But we felt you would really enjoy stories like these. I also know it takes a while for us to give you a part 2. But that is because we handwrite every story we share with you and add twists and turns to keep it interesting. So since we can see that you do not enjoy the cliffhangers, we will minimize them going forward. And since I know you have already forgiven us, because you cannot stay angry with us for too long, let us go back to the story. Because I know you are curious about that accident. I mean, I am too. But before we tell you what happened to Annabelle, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because this story is not finished and you do not want to miss what comes next. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Lastly, we have a gift for you. Click the link in the description below to join our waitlist for your free ebook, How to Attract a High-Value Man Without Chasing. Now let us go back to the story. The boardroom was still full of documents. The contract that had almost destroyed him. The photographs. The transaction records. 12 years of partnership reduced to paper on a table. All of it still spread out behind him while he stood in the corridor outside, phone against his ear, soul 30 floors below, moving through its afternoon like nothing had happened. Like the last 3 hours had not just changed everything. He had won. He had walked into that room this morning with nothing except what she had built for him, and he had left nothing standing. Every exit closed. Every counter-argument addressed before it could be made. She had told him it would go exactly this way, and it had gone exactly this way. He had called her the moment the door closed behind Tae-sung. She had not answered. He had called again. Still nothing. And now there was a voice on the other end of a number he did not recognize. A man's voice. Calm and brief in the way of someone who delivers difficult information as a profession and has learned to do it without color or decoration. An accident. His vehicle. Seodaemun District. He needed to come. Jihan stood in that corridor with the phone against his ear, and Seoul 30 floors below him, and the boardroom behind him, full of the documents that had just brought down everything. Kang Cheol-min had spent 3 years building. He called her number 1 more time. It rang, and rang, and rang. And the sound of it, patient and unanswered, going nowhere, was the loudest thing in the building. He did not wait for his driver. That was the thing that told him, later, how far gone he already was. Baek Jihan did not drive himself anywhere. He had not driven himself anywhere in 4 years. There was a man whose entire job was to sit behind a wheel and move him from one place to another. And tonight, Jihan got into the second car in the basement garage and pulled out of the building before he had fully processed the decision to do so. His hands were on the wheel. His phone was on the seat beside him. Seoul opened up around him. The city at early evening. The lights beginning. The Han River, somewhere to the south, catching what was left of the day. And Jihan drove through all of it without seeing any of it, because the only thing inside him right now was the sound of her phone ringing and reaching nothing. He thought about the evening she had spread documents across the low table by his office window. The way she had organized everything, not chaotically, not the way someone organizes when they are figuring it out as they go, but with the deliberate architecture of a person who has been building toward this for much longer than the conversation suggested. He had watched her hands moving across the pages, and he had thought, without planning to think it, she is the most capable person I have ever had in this room. He thought about the way she had looked at Tae-sung that first morning. The innocence she had arranged over her face like a curtain, while something sharp and completely awake moved underneath it. Did you need me for something, sir? The way she had delivered those words like an offering, while the sentence she had actually just said to his partner was still settling into the walls of the room. He thought about the corridor at Hanok Restaurant. A woman he did not know, in a uniform, with a coffee jug, who had looked at him and said, "Don't sign those papers." Who had told him the truth at the cost of everything she had and then apologized for his suit at the end of it like that was the outstanding item. The traffic light ahead turned red. The car in front of him stopped, and Jihan came back to the road with a lurch, braking harder than he needed to, his heart in his throat for 1 second before his hands found the wheel properly again. He breathed. He focused on the road. He drove the rest of the way to the hospital with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set. The hospital received him the way hospitals receive people who arrive without having called ahead. With the bureaucratic patience of a system that processes urgency as a matter of routine and has long since stopped being moved by the quality of fear on someone's face. The nurse at the desk looked at him, then at her file, then at him again. "You called about an accident in my vehicle," Jihan said. His voice was steady. He had made it steady. "I need to know if the people inside are all right. You are the owner of the black Mercedes that was in the accident in Siodaiman district?" "Yes. Are they all right?" The question came out before he could stop the urgency in it. The nurse looked at her file. Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not concern. The look of someone who is aligning what they are about to say with what the person in front of them appears to be expecting. "There was one injured person," she said carefully. One, he repeated. "Yes, one victim, and he is already out of danger." He. Jihan heard that word, and felt the sentence landing differently than the one you were bracing for. "He?" he asked. The nurse looked at him with the patient curiosity of a woman who has seen many things in this job and has learned that sometimes the most important information is in the question someone asks rather than the answer they are given. "Were you expecting a she, sir?" He did not answer that. She led him through the corridor to where his driver lay in a hospital bed, bandaged across his right shoulder, an IV in his arm. His face carrying the vacancy of a man who had recently been through something his body was still processing. He was breathing. He was stable. The doctor confirmed he would be discharged in few days. He was alone in that car. Jihan stood at the foot of the bed and looked at his driver, and felt the relief and the new fear arrive at exactly the same moment, the way they do when you find out one person is safe, and understand immediately what that means about someone else. She was not in the car. She was not in the hospital. She was somewhere in this city, and she was not answering her phone. The nurse touched his arm lightly. "Sir." They retrieved some belongings from the vehicle. A phone and some documents. "The police will need to clear them before they can be released to you, but if you want to wait..." He waited. The police asked him questions that he answered with the controlled efficiency of a man who has spent a decade in boardrooms learning how to manage conversations he did not want to be having. And then he asked his own question. He opened the missing persons file himself. He provided her name, her description, the last confirmed location. He showed them her photographs from his phone, scrolling through them with a steadiness that cost him more than he was going to show anyone in this room. Her face on his screen. Those eyes. The way they looked at everything with the quality of someone who was always reading the room. Something pressed hard against the inside of his chest, and he held very still until it passed. He went home with her phone and her file. His apartment was quiet in the way apartments are quiet when you have just come from somewhere loud. He sat at his dining table with her things in front of him and did not move for a moment. Just sat with the weight of it. The silence of a space that had his furniture and his art and his view of Seoul and none of her in it, and somehow that absence had a shape now that it had not had this morning. He went through her phone first. He saw his own name on the screen. The missed calls he had placed after the boardroom. 4 of them, each one time-stamped. Each one sitting in her call log like a record of him trying to reach something that was already out of reach. The accident had happened before the first call. She had been gone before he ever tried to find her. He put the phone down. He opened the file. He had seen parts of it before. The transaction records. The Kang network analysis. The pages she had walked him through across the low table in the evenings. Her voice even and precise, her finger moving from column to column. He knew this material. He thought he knew what was in here. He turned to the back section. The pages she had never shown him. Her handwriting changed here. In the front of the file, it was the handwriting of a forensic student. Structured, annotated, deliberately legible. Back here, it was something else. Smaller, more compressed. The handwriting of a person writing for themselves and not for anyone else. Notes that had no audience except the person making them. He read her father's name, James Cole. He read the date, a Tuesday morning, New York. He read the words car accident and then, 2 lines below in her smaller handwriting, the words she had placed underneath it like a question she had been asking for 15 years. Or was it? He turned the page. Kang Chelman's name sitting at the bottom of a transaction record, dated 3 days before James Cole died. He turned another page. Daniel Cole, the brother, Soul, the business that James had agreed to join on the condition that it stay legal. He turned pages slowly, reading everything. He had thought she was working his case. She had been working her father's for a long time, and the family at the center of both of them was the same family, the same man. The man who had taken James Cole and who had spent 3 years placing his daughter into Jihan's life like a key into a lock. Jihan sat at his table for a long time after he finished reading. He was not a man who fell apart in rooms alone. He had not been that man even when he had reason to be. But something sat inside him that night that had no clean name. Guilt that had weight to it. Anger that had nowhere to go. Something else, sitting underneath both of those, that he had been refusing to look at directly for weeks, and that the silence of this apartment was making very difficult to continue avoiding. He set the file down flat on the table. He pressed both hands over it. He would find her. That was not a decision. It had not been a decision since the moment the phone rang in that corridor. It was simply the next thing that was going to happen, as certain as anything he had ever built, and he was going to make sure it happened now. The study of Kang Chilmin's home in the hills above Seoul was a room that understood what it was. Dark wood, heavy furniture, the quality of silence that expensive rooms have when the person inside them is someone that other people are afraid of. A desk that had never once been cluttered because every item on it was placed with intention. Bookshelves that held not decoration but information, files, records, the architecture of a life built on knowing more than the people across from you. Chilmin sat behind the desk. He was not shouting. He had learned very early that the men who shouted were the men who had run out of options. That the most dangerous thing you could communicate in a room was not volume, but temperature. The specific cold of a man who has already decided what is going to happen and is simply waiting for the people in front of him to finish speaking so the next steps can begin. The bodyguard was finishing speaking. He had been speaking for 3 minutes, explaining, with the careful precision of a man who understands that the quality of his explanation is the only thing currently standing between him and something unpleasant, exactly what had happened in Seodaemun district, how he had followed the car, how the distance had been correct, how the impact had been calibrated to disable without killing, as instructed, how he had reached the vehicle within 40 seconds of it stopping, how he had searched it thoroughly, how she was not inside, just the driver, he said. The words sitting in the room like something dropped on a hard floor. Chilmin looked at him. He looked at him the way a man looks at someone when he is deciding something about them and has not yet finished deciding. The bodyguard had seen this look before. He was experienced enough to know that staying very still right now was the correct response. "Get me Daniel Cole," Chilmin said. His voice was completely level. That was the thing about it. The absolute flatness of it. Like a man who had already placed his anger somewhere internal where it was doing something productive instead of wasting itself in this room. "Now," he added. "Just that. One word." The door was opening before it had finished landing. Daniel Cole arrived in under 2 hours. He came in with the energy of a man who has been summoned and knows why, and has spent the drive over constructing an explanation that he believes will be sufficient. A man who has been managing difficult conversations his whole life, and has a framework for this one. He sat down across the desk without being invited to. Chilmin watched him sit. "Where is your niece?" he said. It was not a question, in the way that questions are questions. It was the shape of one, without the temperature of one. Daniel gestured toward the bodyguard standing against the wall. "I passed the tracking information to him. Everything I had. The device, the location pattern, the last confirmed signal. I gave him everything." "Sir?" The bodyguard did not move from the wall. His voice was the flat voice of a man who was not going to accept this. The tracker led to the vehicle. I followed the vehicle. When I reached it, she was not inside. The 3 of them sat in the tension of people who all have something to lose and are each holding the other responsible for the losing of it. Chilmin looked at Daniel. "You told me you could track her," he said. He turned to the bodyguard. "You told me you could find her." He let that sit for a moment. "So, what happened?" He asked it with the calm of a man who already knew part of the answer and was giving them the opportunity to confirm it before he acted on what he knew. "Did she disappear?" Daniel said nothing. "Your niece," Chilmin continued, his voice dropping slightly, which was worse than it rising. "And that man have put my daughter in prison. He let the sentence land. My daughter. My angel. Sitting in a cell right now because two people decided they had the right to dismantle what I have spent 30 years building. He stood, not dramatically, just the movement of a man who has finished sitting. I need her alive, Daniel. I need her in this room. I need her to stand in front of a camera and explain that every piece of evidence Jihan placed before that boardroom was fabricated. That she built it. That he paid her to build it. And Jihan, he continued, moving around the side of the desk with the slow, unhurried movement of someone who owns every room he walks through. I will need a reason to cooperate with getting my daughter released. A reason he cares about enough to do what I ask. He stopped. She is that reason. I have watched him for long enough to understand that. He looked at Daniel with the eyes of a man who had watched James Cole disappear from the world 15 years ago with the same expression. The look of someone who has decided that another person is a resource and has begun calculating how to use them. You will not repeat what happened with your brother, he said quietly. Find her. Daniel. Find her. Quickly. Because if my patience runs out before she is in this room, Seoul will become very small for you. And no place on earth will be far enough from me for your children. He walked back behind his desk. Get out, he said simply. They got out. Annabelle had found her way to the other side of Seoul. But before we move to where she was, let us explain what happened from Annabelle's POV on the day of the accident. She felt them before she saw them. That was the thing about the way she had been raised. Growing up in Daniel Cole's house had done something to her instincts that no classroom ever could. It had made her the kind of woman whose body sent warnings before her eyes had confirmed anything. A shift in the air. A wrongness in the rhythm of the traffic behind them. Something that had no name yet but was already pulling at the back of her neck. She looked into the wing mirror. Two SUVs, black, moving with the patience of vehicles that already know where you are going and do not need to hurry. Her stomach dropped. Not with fear. With recognition. She had grown up watching men move with exactly this quality of patience through Daniel's house. Men who had already decided what was going to happen and were simply closing the distance between the decision and the doing of it. And then, underneath that, this might be how they did it to my father. She turned to Min Jun, 28 years old, quiet, reliable. He had been driving her every day for weeks without complaint and without question, and she had never once doubted him. We are being followed, she said. The same tone she used for everything that mattered. Even. Unhurried. The panic could come later when she was somewhere it was useful. Min Jun's eyes went straight to the mirror. His jaw tightened. 2 vehicles, he said. Since we left, she said. Her mind was already moving. Fast, in multiple directions at once, the way it had learned to move in rooms where the wrong thought in the wrong direction cost you something. They know always where I am. How? Her eyes went to the phone on the seat beside her. She picked it up. She held it, and she thought about her uncle's house. The phones he had bought her over the years. The school shoes. The uniforms. She had changed everything. Everything except the one thing, her SIM card. Her uncle had gotten her the phone when she was 16 years old. Of course, she thought. Of course it was that simple. The thing I never thought to check because I never imagined it was the thing I needed to check. She put the phone down on the seat. Stop at the next restaurant, she said. A busy one. The SUVs. They will not come inside. Too many people. Too much visibility. They are not ready to be seen yet. She had learned this in Daniel's house too. The men who came after dark never came into the light until they had no choice. Pull up at the front. I am going to get out and walk in. And I am going to leave my phone in this car. Min Jun looked at her in the mirror. And then? Drive to Jihan. Tell him I am leaving Seoul. Tell him they are trying to reach me and that I left my phone in the car deliberately so the tracker follows you, not me. She looked at the mirror and met his eyes. Can you do that? Yes, he said. No hesitation at all. Just that one word sitting there solid and clean. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, she said. The restaurant came up on the left. Min Jun pulled to the curb, and before the car had fully stopped, she had the door open. Moving the way she had been moving since she was 18 years old on a Seoul street, she did not look back. She walked through the restaurant door, and straight through the dining room, and out the back. And she did not know that 30 minutes after she stepped out of that car, the 2 SUVs would panic when they saw it turning back toward Jihan's building. She did not know they would hit it. She did not know Minjun would spend the next several days in a hospital bed. She did not know that Jihan would never get the message. She walked out of the back of that restaurant into a side street in Seoul, with her bag over one shoulder. Then she kept walking. She left Seoul that evening on a bus. Cash only. Hood up. She sat near the back and watched the city pull away through the window, and felt the cold air from the vent above her seat, and told herself not to think about Minjun or Jihan or any of the things she had left behind in that restaurant. There would be time for all of that. Right now, there was only the next step, and the step after that. She bought the wig in a small shop in the town where she had stopped. Blonde. Very blonde. The kind of color that makes people look at your hair and forget to look at your face. She bought the sunglasses from a rack near the door and the gray hoodie from a market stall around the corner, and she put it all on in a public bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. She looked nothing like Annabelle Cole. That was the point. She had been making herself invisible since she was 10 years old in Daniel's house. She had done it through silence and stillness and careful movement. Now she was doing it through color and distraction, and the simple truth that people see what they are looking for, and if you give them something loud enough to look at, they will not look further. She pulled the hoodie up over the blonde wig. She picked up her bag, and she went to do what needed to be done. The university dormitory of Daniel Cole's twins was in a quiet part of London called Durham University. The building was the kind of clean and featureless that student housing tends toward. Not unpleasant, just deliberately forgettable. Daniel Cole had not sent his children to the UK by accident. He had sent them there the way he had brought Anna to Seoul, to keep them at a distance from whatever he was doing and whatever it was going to cost. Far from Cheilmin, far from the locked rooms and the late visitors and the shape of a life that required his children to be somewhere else entirely. Someone stood outside their door at 11 in the evening. There was a knock, then another knock, harder this time. A voice from inside. Male. Frightened before it was trying not to be frightened. Who's there? The person said nothing, and knocked a third time, the kind that communicated something beyond a request. A second voice, female, steadying itself. Our father is rich. If something happens to us, he will find you. Open this door, the voice said, low, even. Or I will open it myself. A silence. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened. Two faces. Young. Early 20s at most. Looking at the figure in the black mask, the expression of people who have grown up wealthy enough to believe that bad things are something that happen to other people and are now confronting the evidence that they were wrong about. That. Leah had her brother's hand in hers without seeming to know she was holding it. The person stepped inside. Asked for their phones. The person had a gun. They gave them over with the shaking compliance of people who have decided that cooperation is the correct strategy and are committed to it. The person took both phones and dialed their father's number. It rang once, twice, and then his voice came on, cautious and careful in the way it had been cautious and careful since she was 10 years old in his house. It's Annabelle, the voice finally said. I know your first instinct is to trace this call, she continued, but I think you know I am calling from your children's phones, with a gun at their heads. What? His voice cracked. Not with guilt, not with remorse, with the shock of a man who had not believed she was capable of this. They have nothing to do with any of this. And I do, she said, quiet. Not a shout. Quieter than a shout, which was worse. How did you even know where Daniel started? You would be surprised, she said, how much I learned as a girl working in your home. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. I am telling you to stall Kang Cheilmin. Whatever you have to say to him, say it. Give me time. And if you decide not to, or if you decide to tell him where to find me instead, I want you to know that I will make sure you understand what loss feels like. Are we clear? She ended the call. She put the phone down on the desk between her and the twins. Daniel's children looked at her. The anger came first, the way it always comes when fear finds somewhere to go. Our father was right about your family, Leah said, her hands still shaking but her voice no longer. You are exactly what he said you were. I thought our generation would be different, Elijah said. The disappointment in it somehow worse than the anger. Like he had been hoping for something and had just watched it leave the room. She looked at them both. These two young people in their student hoodies, raised far from Seoul, raised far from everything their father did in those locked rooms. They had grown up with a mother and school fees and careful distance, and a version of Daniel Cole that was probably a reasonable man at the dinner table. They did not know what she knew. They had been given a different story. She reached up and removed her mask. The blonde wig sat bright and strange above her face in the small room. She looked nothing like whatever they had imagined. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been moving without stopping for days, and was running on something that was not energy anymore, but was still keeping her upright. "I'm the villain?" she asked. It was a rhetorical question. The question sitting there between them. "I didn't see any of you at my father's funeral," she said. "I was 8 years old, and I stood at a grave in a dress that didn't fit me, and not one member of his family came. Not one." She looked at Leah. "Your father brought me to Seoul, and kept me in that house, and treated me like furniture, and used my father's money to build more of his own. And when I asked about it at 18, he hit me across the face and told me to get out." Leah's expression moved. Not all the way. But it moved. Something opening behind her eyes that had not been opened before. "Uncle James is dead?" Elijah said, slowly, like the words were something he was placing carefully because he was not sure of the ground they were landing on. "He has been dead for 15 years, Anna said. "We didn't know," Elijah said. He looked at his sister. She looked back at him with the expression of someone cross-referencing what they are hearing against what they were told, and finding a gap that cannot be explained away. "Dad told us that Uncle had done something, made enemies, that we needed to be in school far from Seoul to protect us from Uncle's mistakes. Your father told you my father was the problem," Anna said. They looked at her. "My father is dead," she said. Her voice was level. It had taken years to make it level when she said those words. Years of practice and all the quiet insistence of a woman who had decided that grief was something she was allowed to have privately, but not something she was going to let anyone see being used against her. "Everything he built is gone. The money, the properties, all of it, gone. And your father brought his 8-year-old niece to live in his home, which was quite dangerous, by the way, because your father's source of income is unclean. He took you away from the danger of his work and put me in it." The silence in the room was a different quality now than it had been when she arrived. Elijah looked at his sister. Something passed between them, the private, wordless language of twins, the communication of people who have been processing the world together since before they could speak. He stood up. He looked at Anna. He stretched his hand toward her. Open palm, unhurried. The gesture of someone who has made a decision and is not second-guessing it. "Give me the phone," he said calmly. "Let us help you." He looked at the weapon in her hand. "We both know you are not going to hurt us." He stood up completely. "We have both been played," he said. "By different hands, but the same game." His voice was quiet and entirely certain. "I don't want to play it anymore. Let love start with us. Let the hate end with them." Anna looked at his outstretched hand. She was not a person who trusted easily. She had not been a person who trusted easily since she was 8 years old, and the floor of the world had shifted under her feet, and nobody had warned her it was going to happen. Trust was something she extended carefully and withdrew permanently, and she had very few people in her life who held any of it. She looked at this young man's open hand. She looked at his face. She gave him back his phone. They called Daniel together. Elijah held the phone, and his sister sat beside him, and Annabelle sat across from them, and listened to the call that she could never have made alone, carry more weight than anything she had ever said to that man herself. "Dad," Elijah said. His voice was calm in a way that was clearly costing him something. "We know what you did. We know what you are. And we are telling you now that if anything happens to our cousin, if she is harmed in any way, we will go to the police ourselves, and will expose you." A silence on the line. "And Dad?" she continued. "Where is Annabelle's inheritance? All of it. Where is it?" The silence on Daniel Cole's end was the longest of the call. When his voice came back, it was smaller than it had been. The voice of a man who has held something for so long that being asked to account for it directly has caught him without the defense he would have prepared if he had seen the question coming. "We had to use it," he said. "For some things." The twins looked at each other. Then at Anna. The pity on their faces was not the soft, useless kind. It was the kind that comes from genuine reckoning, from understanding, maybe for the first time, the actual shape of what their father had done and what it had cost someone who had nothing to spare. "You are going to help bring Cheolmin down," Elijah said to his father. You are going to cooperate, all the way. Or we are gone. And we mean that, Dad. We mean it completely. He ended the call. The three of them sat in the quiet of the dorm room, and the city moved outside the window, and Anna looked at her two cousins, these young people she had never known, raised in the shadow of a lie, choosing something different than the people who raised them, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not alone. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Daniel Cole told Kang Chilmin that the tracker signal was showing Anna at Jihan's building, knowing fully well she was no longer in Seoul. He said it with the practiced steadiness of a man who had been lying all his life and had made a craft of it. He said it looking directly at Chilmin across the desk, because he had learned early that the people who look away when they lie are the people who get caught. He did it for his children. They were the most important people to him. He knew his wife would not forgive him if Anna did something to them. He knew that he had to stall, if not for anything, to get back on his children's good graces. Jihan was still running his search when a foreign number called his phone. He almost did not pick up. He did not recognize the country code, and he had been fielding calls all day from people who had nothing useful to tell him. But something made him answer it, on the second ring. Just listen, the voice said. He went completely still. It was her voice. Coming from a number that was not hers, from a country that was not Seoul, but it was her voice, and he felt something drop inside his chest, and then immediately steady itself, because she had said, just listen, and that meant she needed him to hold whatever he was feeling and focus. Kielman is looking for me, she continued. Professional, even. The voice of a woman who has decided that right now is not the time for anything except the next step. I cannot come back to Seoul until everyone is locked up. I'm going to give you a burner number. Get a burner phone and call me at 6. She heard him breathe. At 6, and she gave him the number. And she ended the call. He called at 6. He called at exactly 6, to the minute, which she had known he would because Baek Jihan was a man who, once he had committed to something, committed to it completely. She picked up on the first ring. Anna. His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. Not the boardroom voice, not the office voice. Something underneath both of those. Something that had been stripped back to what was underneath. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm out and I'm safe, she said. I told the driver to. The driver had an accident, he said. His voice was level, but she could hear what it was costing to keep it level. He has been sedated for a while now. But they said he is going to be all right. The air went out of her. Min Jun, who had done exactly what she asked, without hesitation. Who had driven toward Jihan's building because she told him to, and taken the hit that had been meant for her. She pressed her hand flat against the wall beside her, and took one breath. Okay, she said. She pulled herself back. I need you to do something, she said. My uncle is stalling Chilmin by telling him I'm at your place. I need you to set up a room that makes it look like I'm there. Enough to keep him watching and not looking elsewhere. Okay, he said. Now the next step, she said. Do you have someone you trust in the department? Someone who does not answer to Chilmin's money? Yes, he said. A brief pause. I know exactly who to call. She told him the plan. Every piece of it. She spoke for 12 minutes without stopping, and he listened without interrupting, because he had learned in those weeks at the low table that the correct response when she was in this mode was to be very quiet and take everything in. When she finished, he said, I understand. Taesung will break, she said. He will break because he is not loyal to Chilmin the way Mireille is. He helped because it served him, and that means the moment it stops serving him, he will look for another direction. Give him the immunity offer and mean it, but let everything be a facade. And Mireille? Anna was quiet for a moment. Mireille will not break, she said. But she'll be useful because she has her father's ear. She'll tell him the right things to make him paranoid. And when Chilmin will start to panic, a panicking man with 30 years of patience will eventually run out of patience. He will definitely make a mistake. She heard him exhale slowly on the other end of the line. This is one detailed plan, he said. The fact that you are planning all this from out there, without being here. Anna, he said. Yes. I hope this all works. I want you home safe, he said. Simple. Just that. Not dressed up. Not managed. The female police officer's name was Yoon Ji-soo. She was 41 years old, 15 years in the department. The kind of competence that does not announce itself in rooms where other people are being loud. She had short hair and a direct way of looking at people, and she did not impress easily. She sat across from Jihan in a private office, and she read Anna's file without speaking for 37 minutes. Jihan watched her read. When she put the file down, she looked at him for a moment. "This woman is a forensic investigation student?" she said. "Final year," he said. "She did this herself." "Yes." Jisoo looked back at the file. Something moved across her face that was not quite admiration, but was adjacent to it. "She cannot come back into the country right now," Jihan said. "If she surfaces, she is in danger." "She doesn't need to come back," Jisoo said, tapping the file. "She has done enough. Everything I need to shake those two loose is in this file." Mireille received Jisoo first. She sat across the table from the officer with the composed coolness of a woman who had grown up in a house where power expressed itself through stillness. Her hands were folded on the table. Her face was arranged. She had the beauty of a woman who had learned early that her face was an instrument and had practiced using it. Jisoo laid the documents on the table between them. Mireille looked at them without touching them. "You know more than drug routing," Jisoo said. "Your father's network runs deeper than what Jihan presented in that boardroom. We have 14 months of transactions. We have shell companies. We have communications." She paused. "We also have what happened to a man named James Cole in New York 15 years ago, and who made the call that set it in motion." Something moved through Mireille's composure. Very small, very fast, gone before it finished arriving. "If you really had something substantial," Mireille said, her voice even and cold, "we would be in a courtroom, not in this room." Jisoo looked at her for a moment. "Enjoy the time it takes us to get there," she said, and she stood and left. Taesung broke in 11 minutes. Jisoo had barely finished laying the documents on the table before his eyes had moved through them with the rapid calculations of a man running numbers and arriving at a conclusion he did not like. "I am not part of their family," he said. His voice was not the voice from the boardroom. That voice had belonged to a man who believed he was the smartest person managing the most information. This was the voice of someone who had just discovered that he was not. "I was adjacent to it. I helped with some logistical things. Access to certain channels. I was not in the core of—" "Tell me the logistical things," Jisoo said. "All of them. In order. Starting with how you first made contact with the Kang network and ending with the morning of the boardroom meeting." Taesung looked at her. "Immunity," he said. "Evidence first," she said. "Then we talk about what we can do for you." He talked for 2.5 hours. He talked with the urgency of a man who has been carrying something heavy and has just been given permission to set it down, and is not going to waste the moment on caution. He gave names and dates and locations and amounts. He gave the communications chain. He gave the timeline of how Mireille had been positioned in Jihan's life, and by whom, and what the intended endgame had always been. He gave everything. He did not ask for confirmation that the immunity would hold. He just talked. Anna had been right about him. He had not done this out of loyalty. He had done it because it served him, and the moment a better option appeared, he had taken it without looking back. Mireille called her father from the prison phone that same evening. "They offered me immunity if I talk," she said. Her voice had lost some of its composure. "Not much, but some. I did not take it. But Taesung." She stopped. I don't know if Taesung held. Kelman was quiet for a moment. He had been watching Jihan's building for days. He had seen just enough to believe she was inside. He had been patient. He had been managing his patience the way he managed everything, methodically, without waste. But now he was hearing that Taesung had been in a room with the police, and he did not know what Taesung had said, and not knowing was the most dangerous condition he had been in for 30 years. He thought about what his daughter had just told him, how he had been watching that house and nothing seemed to be going according to his plan. Daniel, on the other hand, had been the one feeding him the tracker information. Daniel had been the one telling him Anna was at that building. He called Daniel. Daniel came. He came with an explanation already built and ready, the way he always came to difficult conversations, with the framework of a man who had been managing people his whole life and believed that a well-constructed sentence was the same thing as the truth. "Do you think you can play me?" Chelman said. Not a question. Not an accusation that needed proving. Just a statement of something he had already decided. Daniel started talking. the words coming out faster than they should, filling the room with explanations that had too many details, the way over-prepared lies always do. He talked about the tracker signal, and the device, and the last confirmed location, and how the information had been accurate as of. "Lock him up," Chilman said to the men behind him. His voice had not changed temperature at all. "Tell me when he is ready to talk." Jisoo called Jihan the morning of the third day. "Taesung has been moved," she said. "I have him somewhere Chilman cannot reach him. The moment Chilman finds out, he will understand that his testimony is on record, and that the walls are closing." I know. Annabelle is all that. Because she designed a whole plan from the other side of Seoul, while her partner Jihan has been executing it from the inside. The trap is set. But Chilman has survived 30 years without being caught. Do you think he is going to walk straight into it? Tell me in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now, and hit that notification bell. You do not want to miss what happens next. Chilman called his bodyguard in. He needed things closed before they got worse. Taesung had talked to the police. He did not know yet how much Taesung had given them, and he needed to make sure Taesung could not give them anything more. "Have you handled Taesung?" he said. The bodyguard did not answer immediately. That half-second of silence was the answer. "They moved him," the bodyguard said, his voice flat and careful in the way of someone delivering news they would rather not deliver. "He is no longer in that prison." Chilman looked at him. "No record of where," the bodyguard continued. "The cell is empty. No one knows where." The room went very still. Taesung was already gone. Already somewhere Chilman could not reach. Which meant whatever Taesung had said was already on record. Which meant the signs of her at that building were not signs at all. They were a performance. Something arranged to keep him watching the wrong thing while everything else was being put into place around him. He understood what had happened. He understood who had built it. A 23-year-old woman who had a long-term beef with him. He felt something move through him that was anger, and a little bit like frustration. He stood up. "We are going in," he said. His bodyguard looked at him. "Sir, a forced entry into Baek Jihan's residence will create a record. It will create a record then," Chilman said. He was already moving. "I want to know if she is in that house. And I want to know tonight." "Sir, I have been patient," Chilman said. "Very quiet. Very final. Now I have lost all my patience. They can't keep playing these games with me. We end this tonight." They forced the door. It took less time than it should have for a building of that value, which was something Chilman registered and moved past. His men knew what they were doing. The lock gave. The door opened. They moved inside. The entrance hall was lit and empty. He moved through it, and his men moved behind him, and the building was quiet, in the way that buildings are quiet when the quiet has been arranged. He turned the corner into the main room. Baek Jihan was standing near the window, not alone. Officer Yoon Jisoo stood to his left. 3 of her officers were arranged behind her, waiting with the stillness of people who have been briefed and are simply letting the process arrive at the next stage. Chilman stopped. He looked at all of it. He looked at Jihan. He looked at the room. He looked at the door behind him, which was no longer an exit in any meaningful sense. He had walked into it. He had walked into it completely. He had known it was a possibility, and he had decided the certainty of what he needed was worth the risk of it. And here it was. Standing in Jihan's main room with 3 officers behind a woman he had never seen before, and no Annabelle Cole anywhere, and absolutely no version of this evening that ended the way he intended. Jihan looked at him from across the room. "You fell right into her trap," he said. Quiet. Not triumphant. The voice of a man saying a true thing simply because it is true. Chilman looked at him. In 30 years, he had not been in a room where someone else held all the cards. He did not have a framework for this room. He stood in it, and he looked at Baek Jihan, this young billionaire who had been an instrument for his daughter to move through for 3 years, and he understood that somewhere in those 3 years the instrument had become something else entirely. Jisoo stepped forward. "Kang Chilman," she said. "You are on record for breaking and entering a private residence. You are also on record for a great deal more than that." She nodded to the officer beside her. "We have been building the rest of it for some time now. The drug network, the infrastructure access, the death of James Cole 15 years ago in New York. She paused. When we are done, you will not remember what daylight looks like from outside a cell. The officer stepped forward with the cuffs. Chaelman looked at the handcuffs, then back at Jihan. Then he straightened his jacket, slightly, with the instinct of a man for whom presentation is a habit so deep it survived even this. And he said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say that would do anything for him in this room, and he was not going to waste what remained of his composure on words that had no destination. The cuffs clicked into place. Jihan watched him be led out. He watched the door close. He stood in the silence of his own home and felt the weight of the past weeks, settling into something that was not quite relief and not quite anything else with a clean name. He reached into his pocket. He dialed the burner number. It rang once. She picked up. "It's done," he said. The silence on her end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds where she stood wherever she was and let those 2 words land and do what they needed to do. He could not see her face. He would think about that later. He would think about the fact that he had wanted to be in the room when she heard those words, and had not been, and that was a gap he was going to think about for longer than he intended to. "Yes," she said. Her voice was a different quality than he had ever heard it. Still controlled. Still her. But underneath the control, there was something that had released. Something that had been held very tight for a very long time, and had just been given permission to loosen. The smallest sound. Over the line. Something between a breath and something else entirely. Gone before it finished. Managed immediately and completely in the way that she managed everything. But he heard it. He held the phone against his ear, and he heard it, and he closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Come home," he said. Quietly. "I'll be on the first flight," she said. She looked at her cousins after she ended the call. They were watching her from the small kitchen table where they had been sitting with tea going cold in front of them, waiting. Their faces carrying the tension of people who had been doing something frightening and difficult, and were waiting to find out if it had been worth it. She looked at them. "It's done," she said. Leah closed her eyes briefly. Elijah put both hands flat on the table and let out a breath that had clearly been waiting several days to leave. Anna crossed the room, and she put her arms around them both, one on each side, and she held them, the way a woman holds people when she has not held anyone in longer than she can remember, and is allowing herself to do it now, because it was over, and she was tired, and they had earned it. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for being better than your father." Elijah laughed. A small, genuine laugh that broke the weight of the room a little. "You do know we have a mother, right?" he said. "She's actually quite lovely." "Yay, your mom is kinda chill," Anna said. "I met her." She pulled back and looked at them both. "You are going to be okay. Both of you. I am going to make sure of it." "Where are you going?" Leah asked. "Back to Seoul," Anna said. "I want to be there. I want to watch him go to prison for every single thing he has ever done." They each gave her a long hug, and she left. He was there when she landed. She came through the arrivals door, and she was scanning the hall with the trained automatic attention of a woman who had been reading rooms for 20 years, cataloging exits and faces, and anything that did not fit. And then she saw him, and her training went completely quiet, because there was nothing else to register. He was not standing at the barriers the way people stand when they are waiting, and have made their peace with waiting. He was standing near the front, upright, his eyes on the door, and the moment she came through it he moved. Not walked, moved, crossed the distance between them with the urgency of a man who had spent several days being very controlled about how he felt, and had decided that he was done being controlled about it. He reached her, and he lifted her off the ground, and she grabbed his jacket, and she felt the solid certainty of him, and she closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, and let herself be held by it. When he put her down, he looked at her face. He looked at her the way he had not allowed himself to look at her across that low table in the evenings, when the documents were between them, and there were 100 reasons not to. All the way, without the management. The gold hair falling across his forehead and those eyes on her face, with an expression she had spent weeks pretending not to catalog. "You are incredible," he said. His voice low and certain, and stripped of everything except what it was. He kissed her. He kissed her before he had finished deciding to do it. The way certain things happen when a person has been holding back long enough, that the holding back simply runs out. And she kissed him back with the same certainty, because she had been scared she was never going to see him again, because the flight had given her 2 hours to feel everything she had been refusing to feel, because he was standing right here, and she was done with reasonable. When they broke apart, he looked at her hair. At the bright blonde of the wig sitting slightly crooked from where he had lifted her. The corner of his mouth moved. "Bold color," he said. She laughed. It came out of her before she could shape it into something smaller. A real laugh. The first one in days. She laughed, and he looked at her face when she laughed with the expression of a man who has just discovered something he intends to spend a significant amount of time seeing again. "Come on," he said, his hand finding hers. "There's somewhere I need to go to first," she said, looking at him. Minjun was in a private room on the 4th floor. He had been moved there 2 days ago when it became clear he was recovering faster than expected. He was sitting up when they came in, his shoulder still strapped, the IV gone now, a drama playing on the small television that he turned off immediately when the door opened. He saw her first. Something moved across his face that he did not try to conceal. Relief, first. Then a kind of warmth that belonged to someone who had done something he was glad he did, and was glad to know it had meant something. "I'm sorry," she said, standing at the foot of his bed. "I put you in that car. I put you in this room. You told have to blame yourself. They were the danger, not you," he said simply. "It is on me," she said. "Then we disagree," he said, with a steadiness that was kind without being soft. She moved to the side of the bed and she put her arms around him, gently, the lightest pressure she could manage, and he went very still for a moment, and then he winced, and she pulled back immediately. "Sorry," she said. "It is fine," he said. He was trying not to smile. "I have been in worse situations. I'm going to come back," she said. "Every week until you are out of here." "I know you will," he said. Like it was not a question. Jihan stood in the doorway, watching all of it, with the expression of a man who has been paying close attention to someone for a long time, and is still, regularly, surprised by what he sees. They found Daniel Cole 3 days after Chelman's arrest. When the search team went through the house in the hills above Seoul, working through the rooms one by one, with the methodical patience of people who understood that the house was bigger than it looked, and that men like Chelman kept more than furniture in their private spaces, they found the door in the lower level that the schematics did not account for. Behind it was a corridor. At the end of the corridor was a room. In the room was Daniel Cole. He had been there for days. He was dehydrated and frightened, and when the door opened, he looked at the officers with the expression of a man who does not know whether what is coming through that door is rescue or something else. They brought him out. They brought him out into the daylight of the garden, and he stood there blinking against it, and the officer behind him placed a hand on his shoulder, not gently, the hand of someone performing a professional task. They arrested him there in the garden, with the hills of Seoul visible over the wall, and the city spread out below, and the morning light, doing what Seoul morning light does, gold, and indifferent, and moving through the same sky. It always moved through, regardless of what happened underneath it. The first session of Kang Chel-min's trial fell on a gray Thursday morning in October. The courtroom was the kind of room that had been absorbing the weight of serious things for a long time, and wore it in its architecture. High ceilings, wood paneling, a silence that sat heavy with the awareness of what it was for. Anna arrived early. She wore a deep green dress, simple, well-fitted. The kind of dress that said nothing except that the person wearing it had decided how they were going to show up today and had not left it to chance. The gold necklace was at her throat. She always wore it. But today, she had fastened it with more care than usual. She had stood in the bathroom that morning with both hands at her throat, working the clasp, and she had thought about a 7-year-old girl, receiving it on her birthday, from a man who had come through a door, and the apartment had exhaled. The way it always exhaled when he was in it. She had thought, he would have liked this. She had thought, he is going to get his justice today, and every day after today, until it is finished. She took her seat in the gallery. Jihan sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder was against hers. He had not asked if she wanted company, and she had not asked him to come. They had simply arrived at the courthouse at the same time, and walked in together, and sat down together. And that was that. Cheelman was brought in. She watched him cross the room. He moved with the same bearing she imagined he had always moved with. Upright, contained. A man who carried himself like the most important person in every room he entered. But the suit was a different quality than it would have been, and the room was not one he had chosen, and the people who stood when he entered were not standing out of deference. He did not look at the gallery. She had wondered if he would. She had wondered if he would scan the faces and find hers and let himself understand what it meant that she was sitting here. The niece of the man he had used to remove the father of the woman who had finally cornered him. He did not look. She watched him sit. The proceedings began. She went every day. Some days it was long and technical, and the language of law moved through the room slowly, deliberately, building the case the way law builds cases, brick by brick, each piece of evidence placed and confirmed, and set into the record, with the patience of a system that understood that what it was constructing needed to last. She sat through all of it. She sat through the technical days, and the devastating days, and the day that the communications were read into the record, the messages that laid out the plan for James Cole with the flat efficiency of men discussing a logistical problem. She sat very still through that day with her hands folded in her lap, and the gold necklace between her fingers, where she had brought it without noticing, and Jihan's hand over hers, quiet and present, not trying to fix anything, just staying. She sat through Daniel Cole's arraignment. His guilty plea, the smallness of a man who, faced with the full record of what he had done and what it had produced, had run out of things to say in his own defense. She had looked at her uncle and she had felt something that was not hatred. Hatred would have required her to keep giving him something. What she felt was colder and more final than hatred. It was the feeling of a thing being finished, of closing a door on a room you are never going to need to enter again. She sat through Murray's sentencing. There was an increase in her charges, her composed mask finally cracking, just at the edges, in the last moment before the verdict was read. She sat through it all. Chaelmin's sentencing was on a Friday afternoon in December. The city outside had gone gray and cold the way Seoul goes gray and cold in December. The Han River doing what it does in the cold months. The streets full of people moving fast with their collars up. The winter light making everything look like it is happening inside a photograph, rather than in the world. She sat in her usual seat. The gallery was full today. It had been full for several of the larger sessions, but today had a different quality. The way the air in the room sat. The awareness that what was about to happen was the last piece of something that had been a long time in the building. She had the necklace in her hand, not at her throat. In her palm, held the way she had held it on the flight to Seoul, when she was 10 years old, and the clasp had left a mark pressed into her skin. The way she had always held it when she needed to feel close to something she could not reach. The judge spoke. She listened to every word. She was not the kind of person who let herself be undone in rooms full of other people. She had learned that before she had learned to read. But when the verdict was pronounced, when the sentence was given, and the number of years was placed in the record, and the gavel came down, something happened in her chest that she had not braced for. Not a sob, not tears, just a release. A long, quiet exhale of something that had been held inside her body since she was 8 years old, standing at a grave in a dress that did not fit her. She sat completely still and let it move through her. Jihan said nothing. He put his hand over hers, both hands now, over her one hand with the necklace inside it, warm and steady, and saying nothing because there was nothing to say, and he knew it, and he was simply there. She looked at the front of the room. She looked at Kang Chaelmin being led away, and she thought about her father, James Cole, who had asked one question before going into business, and had been told yes with a mouth, and killed with a hand, and had never known the difference. She thought about her mother, smaller and smaller in the kitchen chair, the light going out slowly. She took the wig off on a Saturday morning. She stood at the mirror, and she looked at her natural curly hair, and she spent a moment just looking at it. This was what she looked like. This was what she had always looked like. She had forgotten, a little, in the months of the wig, and the disguise, and the constant recalibration of how to be seen and how not to be seen. She had forgotten how much of herself was in the simple fact of looking like herself. She nodded at her reflection. She picked up her bag and walked out the door. She graduated on a Tuesday in February. The ceremony was held in the university's main hall. High ceilings and bad acoustics and the smell of too many people in their best clothes on a cold morning. Her cohort filed in together. All the other forensic investigation students with their folded gowns and their nervous energy, and their parents in the gallery with phones raised. She found her seat. She looked up at the gallery. He was there. Third row from the front. which she had not told him to sit in but which she might have predicted if she had been making predictions. He was in a dark jacket, and he had found her immediately, the way he always found her in rooms, and when their eyes met, he did nothing dramatic. No wave, no performance, just a nod. A small, certain nod that said everything it needed to say. She looked back at the stage. Her name was called 20 minutes later. She walked across that stage with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had earned every step of it, not just in these 4 years of forensic study, in everything it had taken to get to the starting line of those 4 years. The cleaning jobs before sunrise, the nannying, the restaurant floor, the evenings with her father's file spread on her lap, every closed door in Daniel Cole's house, every year of watching and waiting, and building herself into something capable of doing what needed to be done. She took the degree with both hands. She stood at the top of that stage for exactly the right amount of time, and she looked out at the hall, and somewhere in the third row of the gallery, a man was clapping with the focused energy of someone who has decided that whatever volume the room is producing is not sufficient. She could not help smiling. The job offer came before she had finished the week. A forensic investigation firm. One of the best in Seoul. The kind of firm whose cases appeared in the news and in law school textbooks, and whose partners had built their reputations over decades of work that actually mattered. The woman who called her was named Lee Borum, 55, a name that Anna had come across in her second year of study, in the context of a case that had redefined evidentiary standards for digital forensics in South Korea. She had read Lee Borum's work at her small kitchen table at 2 a.m, with the dedication of a student who had not yet learned to separate her passion from her studying, and had never wanted to. Lee Borum told her, over the phone, that a certain file had come across her desk, that the quality of the work in it had prompted her to make some inquiries, that she had a position, and that if Anna was interested she should come in on Thursday. Anna held the phone in her hand after the call ended, and looked at her apartment, her textbooks, the wall where she had pinned her research in the weeks she was building the case for Jihan. The small kitchen table that had been her office, and her dining room, and her library for the past 4 years. She called Jihan. He picked up on the second ring. Lee Borum offered me a position, she said. A pause. Then, I know, baby. She blinked. You know, I may have mentioned your name in a conversation some weeks ago, he said, with the careful neutrality of a man who has done something and is not entirely sure how it is going to be received. I did not tell her anything she would not have found out independently. Your work speaks for itself. He paused. I wanted to make sure the right people were looking at it. She sat with that for a moment. You are going to tell me off, aren't you? He asked. I should, she said. Are you going to? She looked at her kitchen wall. No, she said. But only because you're right that the work would have found me eventually, and you are too sweet to do anything I could actually be angry about. She heard him exhale. Are you going to take it? He said. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. Good, he said. He proposed on a Thursday evening in April. They were at his apartment. She had come from a long day at Lee Borum's firm, a case that had required her to spend 5 hours reading financial records with the kind of focused attention that left her pleasantly emptied out by evening. She was sitting at his kitchen table with her shoes off, and her files spread in front of her, and a cup of tea that was the right temperature, and he was somewhere behind her, and the city was doing what Seoul does at night, brilliant, and indifferent, and continuous. He sat down across from her. She looked up from the file. He was looking at her with the expression that she had catalogued years ago at a window table in a restaurant, and had been pretending not to recognize ever since. Nothing arranged in it, just entirely open. The face of a man who has decided to stop being careful about how much he is showing. He put the ring on the table between them. Small box, dark wood. He pushed it across the files toward her without a word, and she looked at it, and then at him, and the room was very quiet, in the way of rooms before something is said that cannot be unsaid. You are the most extraordinary person I have ever known, he said. He looked at her across the files. You built something when you had nothing, he said. And you thrived in everything you built for yourself. I'm very happy to have you in my life. And I want you in my life for the rest of my life. She looked at the box. She looked at him. She thought about every version of this moment she had never allowed herself to imagine, because imagining things required believing they were possible. And for a very long time, The future had been a direction she moved in rather than something she was allowed to picture. She thought about her father, the way the apartment exhaled when he walked through the door, the way a man who loved someone could make a space feel entirely different from how it felt without him in it. She reached across the files. She opened the box. Inside, on a small cushion, was a ring she would have chosen herself if she had been allowed to choose. Simple. Gold. The kind of thing that was going to work with a necklace that had been at her throat since she was 7 years old. She looked at him. Yes, she said, tears falling down her cheeks without her permission. He put the ring on her finger, and she looked at it on her hand, and then she laughed, quietly. The way she laughed at things that moved her, the way she had laughed with him at the airport with the crooked blonde wig. And he reached across the files and put both hands around hers and held them. The city moved outside the window. Seoul, indifferent and brilliant, going about its night. They married in June. Small. She had been clear about that. The people who mattered. The people who had earned the room. Jisoo was there. Because some debts are the kind you pay by keeping the person close. Minjun was there, fully recovered, standing in the back with the quiet dignity of a man who had done something that mattered and did not need to be thanked for it again. The twins were there, her cousins, Elijah in a suit that was slightly too large for him and Leah in a yellow dress, both of them finding her eyes at the same moment across the room, and smiling the smile of people who know what it costs to get here. Lee Borum sent flowers. Anna wore white. Not a complicated dress. Something clean and well cut, and entirely herself. The kind of thing you wear when you are not performing, being a bride, but simply being a woman, on the best day of her life so far. Her hair was out, natural and full and crowned with the beauty of a woman who has made her peace with every single thing she is. She stood at the front of the room and she watched him walk toward her. The way he moved, unhurried, with the same certainty he had always moved with. The way his face looked when he saw her, entirely open, entirely unguarded, the most unmanaged she had ever seen it, in all the time she had known him. And then he was in front of her, and she looked at his face, and there was nothing else. Just this. Just here. Just the city outside, and the people behind them, and the life that was opening in front of them with all its unknown rooms. She reached for his hands. He gave them, and she held on. If this story moved you, if you stayed from the coffee spill all the way to the altar, we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments what moment hit you the hardest. Tell us what you were thinking at the end. Tell us where you are watching from. Share this story with someone who would love to listen to this story. This is one of the ways you appreciate us for giving you stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Because we make stories like this every single week. And every one of them is built for people who believe that the ones who carry the most deserve the ending they fought for. And if you want our free ebook, How to Attract a High-Value Man Without Chasing, the link is in the description. Join the waitlist. It is waiting for you. We will see you in the next one.